Hi. Oh, that was a thing I was supposed to do. Hi, everyone. Hi, people. Hello, hello. Okay. Pin comment. A. Hi, everyone. Woo, okay. I'm gonna somehow keep myself accountable to time. So, I am gonna set up a phone next to me. Wow, it is a lot of people. Hi everybody, I'm Ronnie. I am one of the members of Philadelphia Red Umbrella Alliance. And while we give people a few more minutes to kind of filter in, hi, I don't know who said this, but hi. You know, I need to be more on Instagram because I follow a couple of you, but I don't know who you are. I feel like I know you guys in real life, but I'm like, thank you. One day I'm gonna do a cool art project about my mask. Anyway, before I start rambling again, hi everybody, this is Rani. I'm one of the members of Philadelphia Red Umbrella Alliance. I have been thinking about a class series, mostly because I like engaging with community. And, COVID-19 has really pushed us to be like, hey, maybe we should engage with community online a little bit more. And I'm like, yes. So I wanted to develop a series of class, and thank you. I also I also kind of wanted to push towards fundraising. I work with at least two projects. One of them is the Philadelphia Red Umbrella Alliance, and one of them is Whole History. And I also have a personal Patreon of my own. And today I want to use this class as a way to raise money for our Philadelphia sex worker fund relief. That's a mouthful. I pinned a comment because I know how to do tech, I swear. It has our Venmo, our Cash App, our PayPal, and if you really want to go out of your way to pay on GoFundMe, that's totally fine. Unfortunately for right now, you're gonna have to go on our website, phillyrua.com, phillyrua.com. And pay us whatever you like. So whatever you'd like to tip me, put it in our little fundraiser. It goes towards sex workers in Philadelphia, people who are Black, trans, living with HIV, people who use drugs, people who are houseless, people who are street-based. We have a huge whole array of diversity of folks that we are servicing with our fundraiser, which is really cool and also really overwhelming, but mostly cool. Just before I came on here, I actually paid somebody. It was a really fun time. So, all of your dollars go towards places. All of your dollars go towards housing somebody, goes towards somebody's medical care, dependent care. Hard cash is a really cool way for supporting people on the ground. I always like giving people cash. It's also cool to give people other resources, but it's really cool to give people cash. Cash is the best harm reduction tool that we have. So anyway, it is 8:05. I am going to remind you that there is a pinned comment, and you can pay us through all of these different cool, fun cash apps and various things. This class is a fundraiser for the Philadelphia Sex Work Relief Fund. Okay, great. Now that it's 8:05, cash is the best harm reduction tool that we have. Amen. Yes. I I wanted to talk. So, this is gonna be a really one-on-one class. Not gonna lie. Also, I've never done this before, so bear with me. Rani, is it cool to live tweet this, or would you prefer on the download? Oh, please live tweet it. Live tweet it, on Twitter. We are also Philly Rua, PhillYRua. So if you start your first live tweet by tagging us, that would be really cool so that people can find us. You can also tag me at Rani Begum on Twitter. That would be cool and nice. Yes, please live tweet. The more eyes we get, the more money we get. And also we do a lot of other cool things. Mutual aid isn't just based on cash. Mutual aid begins when we build community. And we do a lot of cool work, on the ground, away from IG, doing a lot of, especially with our sister organization, Project Safe, in Kensington. And, some of our, other organizations, Sister Savage, Morris Home, we have a couple other organizations that, we are, in network with. We do a lot of cool work on the ground, building community. So, yes, please, live tweet us, quote us, tag us, all that fun jazz. And tell people to give us money. We need cash. Okay, great. Today we're going to talk about whorephobia, capitalism, and police. It is 8 o'clock, so, our state-funded, police-funded fireworks started exactly 20 minutes ago. This is a conspiracy theory that's apparently gaining ground with facts. I had this conspiracy theory because I don't know if you guys remember, but we had Philly explosions for a while, and everybody was like, ooh, what are these explosions? Are these the ATMs? Sounds suspicious. And then I think the police just changed tactic and just started doing fireworks. Why do I think it's the police? Because if you guys have been in Kensington long enough, people in Kensington don't do 4th of July fireworks regularly. I was in Kensington till 10 o'clock last night, and I was like, wow, this is a 4th of July display in Kensington, just above the train station. Interesting, amazing. Yeah, if that's how people are spending their unemployment money, great, but okay, all right. We are not going to get into fireworks today. What was I saying? Right. So, we were talking about the police. And I actually really just I think that COVID-19 has given us this really interesting microcosm of how policing works, in real life. We know that we do know that there is a huge, huge history of policing in America. Police is, before there was a police, we just called them slave-catching patrols. And then, we changed a couple laws, we changed a couple names, we gave people some uniform, we gave people cool cars instead of horses, and we gave them guns instead of whatever else they were carrying during slavery. Some historian is gonna tap me on it, right? And we changed the name from slave catching patrols, and we just started calling them the police. That is the history of police, right? History all over the history of police all over the world, globally, is rooted in anti-blackness. But, if we're going to talk about America, it is absolutely rooted in anti-blackness, rooted in the history of slavery. But, instead of just talking about, large historical context, I think that COVID-19 has given us this, really interesting glimpse of how policing works on a really one-on-one basis, so to speak. In a lot of cities, I don't know if it happened in every single city or in every single state. I know that it happened in Philadelphia and it happened in a lot of other cities. When COVID-19 came in and cities were exploring different lockdowns and other practices, other safety practices, one of the things that the city decided in many different cities was that the police was going to stop arresting for prostitution and narcotics. Police stopped arresting for prostitution in Philadelphia, at some point, I think in like the third week of March, if my memory serves me right. I should have looked up the date before I came on here, but that's fine. Police stopped arresting both for narcotics and prostitution in late March, and they did start rearresting for narcotics in late May. I want to say about the third week of May. As far as I know, technically, the police is still not arresting for prostitution in Philadelphia. And so, the laws around prostitution are pretty complicated, right? Like you can get arrested for prostitution, you can get arrested for loitering, you can get arrested for public nuisance, you can get arrested for like a host of like weird laws that have no real definition, and they kind of get lumped in with prostitution laws. In New York, there is a law for standing while trans. So, like, there is an actual law, if, like, the police think that you are way too provocatively dressed, and if you are, if they think that you're a trans person, they can arrest you. Like, that's a law, and it's often connected to things like prostitution. And so, when, especially right now in a climate in which we're talking about police and in which we're talking about defunding the police, there's a conversation and a question about what do the police do? There is this wide idea, that the police is supposed to serve and protect our communities. If the police is supposed to serve and protect our communities, then what does it mean when in the middle of a national public health crisis, we stop certain arrests, one of them being prostitution. And so, it kind of gives us a glimpse into this relationship in which the police, when they do their job, they're not necessarily doing it for public safety, because clearly when police stopped arresting for prostitution, it did not compromise public safety. Actually, what would have compromised public safety was if police had kept on arresting people for minor offenses, whatever they deemed minor offenses, right? Like whatever the state deems minor offenses. In this case, the minor offense of being prostitution, and if they put people into prison, it would have accelerated. No, that was an actual city ordinance that said that the police would stop arrests or would suspend arrests or whatever language that they used, and there was a lot of suburban panic, I want to say, that people were like, oh no. So I think some of the things that they were gonna suspend arrest and they were gonna give out tickets was narcotics, prostitution, robbery, and I think like something else. And so like the police were only charged with arresting for like major crimes, so I think like homicide, something like that. And for everything else, the police was like, maybe we're just gonna like pause arrests. Yes, Delco panic. We're just gonna like pause arrest and we're gonna like ride out this wave of like a virus, and then when it pleases us, we'll like start like arresting people again. So I think like ticketing for parking also came into that thing. Okay, somebody suggested that if I'm answering a comment in the chat, if I could read it out loud. It's kind of confusing if you're just listening. Thanks, I really appreciate the suggestion. The comment up was if the stopping arrest was an actual documented thing or was a community observed phenomenon. And so the city had like put out an ordinance in which they said that they were going to stop arresting for minor offenses, and one of the minor offenses being prostitution. So they did define narcotics and prostitution. Usually cities define narcotics and prostitution under the same category, and they did define that they would stop arresting for narcotics and prostitution when the city was going into COVID-19. When the city was going into COVID-19 lockdown, whatever. And so it gives us a glimpse into the fact that, like arresting for prostitution, for example, arresting for all of these minor offenses in effect wasn't really keeping any one of us safe. So then the question becomes, if like arresting for prostitution, if arresting for minor offenses doesn't keep us safe, then why is it that the police is doing it? Right? Like that's like the public safety or the policing question then that we have to answer. Why is it that the police arrest, like why do police arrest these people in the first place when it doesn't keep the public safe? Right? I'm just going to do a time check. It is 8:16. And so I think that it is really important to understand how police arrest when it comes to sex workers. For those of you who are who are civilians, civilians meaning sex workers who call people who do not do sex workers civilians. So those of you who are especially not sex workers, you may not be familiar with this term, hierarchy, right? So the hierarchy that has been set up within the sex work industry in and of itself. I meant to post, so in the past year and some, me and Rebel Cunt of Ho History Project, we've been doing some of these workshops at the Haverford College. And we came up with this triangle that I'm going to post on my Instagram after this live. But I'm going to sketch it out really quickly on a piece of paper. Because I think hierarchy is important to understand when we are talking about policing and sex work. And see, I got it. I have a Sharpie, you guys. I'm so official. So, we have a triangle. At the top of the pyramid are the people who are the most safe, who are the most safe, right? And when I say the most safe, I mean who are least likely to be arrested, to be directly arrested for crimes related to sex work. It doesn't mean that they are totally and completely safe, right? Like when you're doing sex work, you have to remember that sex work in and of itself is criminalized work, right? There are just some of us who are less likely to be arrested, and there are some of us who are much more likely to be arrested. So, I like to put, so I think I'm gonna like draw a line in the middle, and in the middle of the triangle, I'm just gonna say full service sex work. And when I say full service sex work, a lot of you would probably know it by the term prostitution or call girl. That is full service sex work, right? And even in full service sex work, we have a little bit of hierarchy, right? So there are people, so I'm gonna write at the bottom, there are people who are street-based, right? So for example, in Philadelphia, one of the places, and it's only one of them, one of the places where street-based work is really popular, for example, is Kensington. It's not the only place. The stroll is not only in Kensington. It's one of them. Full-service sex work doesn't only happen in street-based work, right? It happens indoors. So it happens in, so I'm just going to write here, indoors. It happens in hotel rooms, it happens in strip clubs, in massage parlors. You probably have heard of people doing extras, and I would say that it usually falls under full service sex work. I would also say, I think that doms and sugar babies often have this really interesting space in sex work where everybody and their mom will debate themselves blue in the face if they're actually full-service sex workers. If they're actually prostitutes or not. But if you're staring down at a cop's badge who's arresting you, if you are in court looking at a judge The judge doesn't care if you define yourself as a dom, if you define yourself as a sugar baby, if you define yourself as whatever. If the police have arrested you for prostitution, the police have arrested you for prostitution. Right? But, there are people who are indoors, there are people who are street-based. So, or, outdoor work. I think it's also really important to destigmatize outdoor work a little bit. I think that every time people think about street-based work or outdoor work, people think about it in really stigmatizing manner, right? And I think that this is really important to talk about because this is where policing comes in the most. Before I get into this, right about full service work, I'm just going to put in online work. I know that Beyonce sang about OnlyFans. So, OnlyFans comes into it. Porn comes into it. Everything and anything, like everybody knows about some financial dominatrix, some findom who like made $1 million in 1 month and, got an article in every single like Business Insider magazine or whatever, right? So these are the people who are not who may or may not be doing full service work, right? There are a lot of people who do online work who also provide full service work on the down low. Premium snaps. Yes, premium snaps is also would also be considered online work. So anybody who's selling nudes online, on Snapchat, ManyVids, and on Reddit, there's like so many ways to do online work, right? And so I'm just gonna like put them above, like at like this like top of the pyramid where they are less likely to get arrested. And then, there are folks who are under that line, full service workers, who are more likely to get arrested. The more outside you are, the more you're likely to the more likely you are to be arrested. So, it is important to think about when people do get arrested, right? If we think about the stereotypes of sex work, if we think about the stereotypes of how police and community interacts with sex work, we think about people who call the police on sex workers, right? And I think that this is also really important to talk about in terms of community policing as we are having these conversations on defunding the police and what community policing looks like. We also need to remember that for sex workers who are the most marginalized, it is the community that is calling the police on them. So what does that look like when the community calls the police on them? Sometimes, think about when the police is called on houseless people. They are seen as a nuisance, they are seen as loitering, they are seen as disturbing the peace, and because sex workers who are outdoors are often seen as soliciting, I'm sure that a lot of you have seen signs about no solicitation in your little local grocery store or wherever it is that you're living, right? Like it's a sign that, says, that means something to the underground economy. For sex workers, it's like a really clear sign of this shopkeeper, if he suspects you of harassing his customers or her customers, they're going to call the police on you. And so, then we have to think about this intricate relationship between community, police, and capital. When the community calls the police on sex workers, they're not looking to de-escalate the situation. They are seeing sex workers, when we see other human beings as disturbing the peace, we see them, we see them as the other, right? When we have, if we think about how we stigmatize houseless people, how we stigmatize people who are using drugs, and how people are selling sex openly and on the street, it threatens our way or our conceptualization of order. And when we think about how we think about order, we have to think about capitalism. We think about, who is doing business on the street. is it only legitimate business on the street when it is indoors, like when you have a store and when you have a shop and, like when you have all of these illusions of capital? So if people are walking around and just, tapping people on the shoulder, if people are, cruising cars, like people do car dates, and car dates look like, like sometimes a client will cruise down the street in a car and will just call a worker to them, right? Cruising down the street. We see that as illegitimate work because it threatens our sense of order in capitalism. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm gonna pause a little bit and I'm gonna wait for some responses. Also, I'm gonna read through some of the comments here. Can you talk a bit about illegal or underground brothels and strip clubs and dungeons? How do you feel about the National Stripper Strike? I think that you all should. I think the National Stripper Strike was led by a black woman in New York. And, I think she's amazing. I think that in that sense, if you're gonna think about, so if we set up the system in which only people can do commerce, right? Because capitalism is set up in a way where we defined our civilization through commerce. There's only certain types of commerce that is allowed within our parameters, right? So this is how we connect capitalism and policing really directly when it comes to sex work. Yeah. Somebody said it also threatens the patriarchal capitalism, can't have bodily autonomy in capitalism. Yes, an important and interesting take about how capitalism is housed and owned by landlords. I think that, it is also important to think about that a lot of people who are street-based are often also houseless. They are also at the intersection of HIV positivity, of being HIV positive, and sometimes they are using drugs. And I think that it's really important to think about or to unravel the stigma that we have even in sex worker rights groups or, sex worker rights spaces and allies about how we think about what kind of sex work is even legitimate, right? Even as sex workers and as sex working allies, we delegitimize the work that is done by our most marginalized group. We delegitimize the work that is done on the street. We delegitimize the work that, the labor that is produced, which is not solely for rent, for food, or, to climb up the capital ladder. If somebody, for example, in Kensington, and I keep bringing up Kensington because I think that Kensington is such a microcosm of what happens, in a lot of different places. And also because Kensington is sensationalized, right? Every few years, the New York Times will write a really gross article about folks using drugs in Kensington. And, when we think about Northern Liberties and Frankfurt and how gentrification is kind of pushing Kensington in from both sides and how we think about policing. So often, even in the city of Philadelphia, will talk about people who are using drugs and the encampments that they create when they're using drugs. And, people in the neighborhood and the community, for example, will talk about needles. And so, that we are at this intersection of delegitimizing the labor of sex workers and other underground economies when we are also, when we are not destigmatizing the most marginal work that happens in community, right? So we are delegitimizing it because it is not civil, right? We are not putting it in a really cool, cute little shop, or we are not doing it indoors, right? Sex worker rights, I think, is plagued by respectability politics, in which, this idea that strippers are legal, Online work is legal. You know, like there's this like cute, respectable person who's only doing work in her home and she should be allowed to do her home. But what about people who are outdoors? What about people who are sucking dick for money and who are going to use this money to go get the drugs that they need to survive? This too is legitimate work, right? But all of these forms of work and how and like where this labor goes, right? Like when people use their labor for like the very base survival of trying to go get drugs, right? That is also survival labor. But it like really undercuts capitalism because these are the people who are like not necessarily interested in climbing capitalism. So when we think about police, right? Like even in a world where we decriminalize prostitution, right? Even if we like strike off laws that criminalize prostitution in and of itself, as long as we're criminalizing people who are loitering, as long as we're criminalizing people who are using drugs, as long as we're criminalizing people who are selling drugs on the streets, prostitution would not be decriminalized, right? As long as we are criminalizing HIV positive status, as long as we're stigmatizing being STI positive, we don't decriminalize sex work. I'm going to do a time check. It is 8:32. Okay. I'm going to go back and read through some of the comments here. Oops. I didn't want to do that. My bad. No! I swear, I know how to use tech. Why order is necessary for capitalism. An important, interesting take about how capitalism is housed and owned by landlords. How do you feel about customers calling a sex worker over to them? Like, how do they know that person is a sex worker? Do you think it's okay to call just anyone over? Customers in the car, I mean. Does anyone here know what Kensington is? Kensington is an over-policed neighborhood in Philadelphia. Yes. Punjabi Pool said, Kensington is a drug capital right now in Philadelphia. It is seen as a drug capital in Philadelphia. Kensington is a neighborhood. I'm not really very good at geographies, but from what I understand, it is close to a port. And through that port, a lot of drugs come in. So we do have drug tourism in Philadelphia, but particularly in that neighborhood. So for people who are looking for certain kinds of harder drugs, they come to Kensington. And Kensington, historically, and even actually, like Fishtown, Frankfurt, because they are neighboring. They're neighboring Kensington. For a very long time, they were seen as these neighborhoods, quote unquote, full of junkies, right? And people didn't like to go there. Like, people didn't like to go to Fishtown. Like, people wouldn't step into Kensington. People, like now we've like renamed some of these places like Northern Liberties. And I think, like the outskirts of Kensington is being observed as being, being also called Port Richmond. So, like these are like some gentrifying tactics. And the other gentrifying tactic that happens is that a few years ago, there was a much bigger flood of policing in Fishtown, or what is currently known as Northern Liberties. So right now, if you like go by Spring Garden, if you like go by Northern Liberties, you see like all of these like cool high-rise buildings and, like cute cake shops and, it's this like up-and-coming it like has this feel of like up-and-coming neighborhood, right? And this is not what Fishtown was historically, and they're like pushing that they're pushing that policing into Kensington, and the idea, and so now, so for a very long time, there have been harm reductionists in Kensington who have been, like trying to advocate for people who live there, who work there, who use drugs there. And, part of this advocacy looks like syringe access. Part of this looks like advocating for having Narcan and Naloxone on hand all the time so that we could reverse overdoses. Project Safe has done a lot of work around it. Project Safe has also talked in the past couple years around the idea of racial justice, the war on drugs, and safe consumption sites, especially when it comes to neighborhoods like Kensington, and especially when it comes to a city like Philadelphia. I believe they wrote an op-ed in 2016 or 2017 about how racial justice in Philadelphia around war on drugs cannot be achieved if we don't think about safe consumption sites, and also if we don't consult the folks of color who are caught in this war and who are so heavily impacted by this. What are my nightly explosions? They are police-sponsored fireworks. I talked about it in the beginning of this teaching. I think, there are fireworks happening all over the city, but particularly in West Philadelphia, and I think that the police are doing it. But that's what they are. They are fireworks. There was another comment that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, somebody asked, why is it important for capitalism to have order? That's a great question. No, I just asked if they're going on right now. Yes, sorry. Somebody's asking if they're going on right now, loud noises. Yes, the loud noises that you hear in my background, they are fireworks. They are loud and explosion-y, and they sound like, well, you guys can hear what they sound like. They're fireworks. They started at around 7:40 today, and they're probably gonna go until 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning. It happens every day. I think that capitalism doesn't give us capitalism is about control, right? Capitalism is about power. Capitalism is about consolidating power at the top. So, for example, if we think about somebody like Jeff Bezos, or heck, even Bill Gates, right? Sure, whatever. If you think about people like that, right? What is it that money gives them? Money gives people power. Jeff Bezos has, Jeff Bezos not only has just these giant miles and miles and miles of property around his house, he literally also has a private police force that protects his private property. And he can do that because he has money, right? And what capitalism does is that, it just consolidates power through money. And so, because it's consolidating power through money, it gives us this illusion that as long as we follow the rules that are put down by capitalism, we are going to climb our way to the top. So it gives us this idea that, there's this idea that, we have to just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. So, if you do everything right. So you probably heard this. If you're a sex worker, you've probably heard this from other sex workers. If you work right, if you work a certain, if you advertise a certain type of way, if you're working on certain platforms, if you, don't take clients under a certain rate, if you, there are these things, there are these ways of working, even just within sex work in and of itself, that says that if you do these things right, you're going to be able to consolidate money, which means that you're going to be able to get to safety. For those of us who are at the very bottom, for folks who are houseless, for example, safety looks like housing. So how do they get housing? They get housing by having money. How do they get money? So if they're not able to save up money, they're the ones who are blamed for this, right? You're not working right. You're not clean enough. You're only working outdoors. All of these things. So, capitalism, what capitalism does is that it consolidates money, right, in a hierarchy, and then it blames people at the bottom, and it says, if you did this right, If you earned money right, if you followed the rules, you'd get to the top. You'd be fine. You'd be the next Jeff Bezos. But that's literally not true, right? For people who experience houselessness, they know that houselessness is a chronic issue. Once you're houseless, usually, like people get houseless because they're evicted. Once you're evicted, that shit stays on your record for like 10 years. Landlords don't want to rent to people who have evictions on their record. So, thinking about COVID-19 and thinking about the disaster that's coming, how do we think about just the question of housing, right, in terms of capitalism? So if you can't get housing because you have an eviction on your record, now what? It's like such a basic barrier in to such basic safety that most people just don't think about it. People are like, you can go to shelter, but shelters are inaccessible and shelters are ruthless. They're oppressive. They don't allow, they have a lot of rules. There is a lot of stealing and infighting that happens at shelters. The staff are oppressive. On most shelters, the staff are oppressive and people don't want to stay because they don't feel safe there. They don't feel safe there because the staff make them feel unsafe. So now they're back on the street. And it becomes a cycle. For a lot of our Kensington participants, a lot of them experience this temporary housing on a chronic basis, but then they're they could have housing 1 week and then next week they could be houseless. And capitalism does that, right? Capitalism says that landlords make sense, but somehow affordable housing doesn't make sense. And capitalism says, look, there are all of these buildings. If you just had enough money, you could get into that and you would have housing. And that's a lie. Hold on, I'm gonna do a time check. My time check is 8:42. Somebody at the top was asking, I have to scroll a little bit. How do you feel about customers calling a sex worker over to them? How do they know said person is a sex worker? Do you think that it's okay to call just anyone over? I really want to remind people that there are certain neighborhoods where both sex workers and clients know that this role exists. And I think that, people should really think about what they're going into when they are moving into these neighborhoods. So, for example, it's actually happening in Southwest Philly. Southwest Philly, as West Philly gets gentrified, so do parts of Southwest Philly where street economies exist. I used to live on the edges of Kensington and, street economies exist there and people are moving into these neighborhoods. And I think that, part of what I think we really need to be thoughtful about is that neighborhoods have their own ecosystem. Neighborhoods have their own ecosystem. And so when clients come in, they come into certain neighborhoods looking for certain services. Not all clients look for street-based people. Clients sometimes go to massage parlors. Clients will go to strip clubs and ask for extras. Clients, the clients who know how to do this and want to pay for it, will look. A lot of clients will look online, and it's not that the client who's looking for service on the street is not looking online. There is a huge intersection that exists. So I think that, before you ask, I think that it is really instinctive for a lot of us who have studied liberal feminism, where if you're just it's patriarchal and it's terrible and you shouldn't be harassing people. I agree that men shouldn't randomly be harassing people on the street. Every single time that I sit on my front steps in front of my house, somebody will ask me if I am married. Every single time, without mistake. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting out there for 10 minutes. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting out there for 2 hours. If I'm sitting there for 2 hours, it's just going to happen a lot. Right? Should those men be coming up to me and asking me if I'm married because they want to get my number? No, they shouldn't. Also, if I'm in Kensington, if I'm like in Kensington at 2 a.m. and if I'm being solicited, does it suck? Yes, I have been solicited in Kensington. I am not a street-based worker, and I don't provide services on the street. But I also know that that's the ecosystem in Kensington. So I also have to like be mindful and be cognizant of this fact. And I think that like part of the tension that comes in here when it comes to like outsiders or, you know, like people who are not street-based having difficult feelings about street-based work is that your difficult feelings, our difficult feelings, brings in the police. And so, you know, so I think that we really do like need to like think about the difficulty of the matter in which, yes, men shouldn't be harassing people on the street, but also if you're feeling some type of way about street-based sex work and clients who are perusing for sex workers, also clients usually know who a sex worker is. Usually they're not wrong. But, you know, I mean, men are men. We could also be bringing more police and bringing more attention to people who don't need more police. So it is a difficult space to be in. And I don't think that we can have this conversation without street-based workers in the room. We can't have these difficult conversations about what this looks like without consulting the people who are part of this ecosystem, right? Like people, like I talked to somebody a half an hour before I got on this call. She knows how to work online. She knows what websites to post on online. And she's like, I need money, so I'm out in Kensington. And she was telling me what it's like what it's out right now in Kensington. She's like, I know what it looks like online. It's not fun. It's not fun to be in Kensington, but it is what it is. So, you know, I do think that we also need to think about the autonomy that of sex workers, of people who are street-based and who are working on it and who are like in this space. And I really want to also like warn people about organizing that happens and doesn't happen within street-based folks, right? Like street-based folks are very, very aware of police, and they have really, really hard rules and hard tactics about how they react to police brutality, right? Like, I've met street-based people who are like, if he pulls out his badge because he doesn't want to pay me, guess who's not getting a service? Like, I would rather spend a night in jail than provide service for no money. Like, that's a thing. Like, that's a rule that, like, street-based workers have. Like, there's, like, so many intricate rules and intricate ways that people who are involved in street-based economies navigate the scene of police brutality and of capitalism, right? Like, they have to navigate people who are calling police on them. Shopkeepers, clients, landlords, Karen walking her dog. And then on top of it, you know, like, that's, like, capitalism in which, like, people call the police on them. And then, you know, there is the policing system itself. You know, there is policing and social workers and prisons and incarceration and dawn court that people also have to navigate when they're out there. You know, and I think that coming back to this idea of like how we get safer when we are indoors, the only reason that full service workers are safer indoors is because we are not in direct sight of the police. So when police know who is a worker, police know who is selling drugs, they know these people, you know, like, regardless of if they're from the neighborhood or not, police know who's doing what, and they often don't intervene when there is violence on the street. That is a common experience, of police violence. The other very common experience is when police do get involved, they rob people, right? It's called I forget what it's called. There's like an official term for it, in which they seize people's money and they don't document it, and because they seize people's money in an arrest, this money won't be returned to them. And that's robbery, right? Police rob people on the street. And so, like when you're indoors and when you're like not in direct sight of the police, there are other things that, like you are navigating. And so I think that, like when we're thinking about whorephobia, like who are the sex workers that are the most stigmatized? People who are out in the streets, people who are maybe or maybe not doing it for drugs, who are often houseless, right? Like these are the people who are the most stigmatized. These are the stereotypes that we hold and that we say, ew, sex work is terrible, patriarchy. And these are the people that get policed. There's this one last point that I wanted to make. Policing of sex workers is rooted in anti-blackness. We do have to remember whose bodies get the most policed in terms of their sexuality. And it's black women's and it's black trans women's, right? We know from slavery, from the history of slavery, that somebody commented, police seizures are the #1 form of theft in the United States, beyond wage theft. I agree. We know that the history of slavery gave us this way of policing black women's bodies and black women's sexuality. And so when we think about anti-blackness in policing, we also have to think about like when it comes to sex work, who are the people who are getting more policed? So when it comes to black bodies, right, like when it comes to black women, black femmes, black trans women, other black queer people, there is a history of racism that is coded within both policing, within patriarchy, within capitalism, that makes it so that black folks who are on the margins, black folks who are on the street, who are more likely to get harassed, right? Who are most likely to get targeted, who are the most likely to get searched, illegal stops and frisks, who are most likely to get incarcerated. So I also, like when we talk about sex worker rights and when we talk about policing and when we talk about whorephobia, we also have to remember that whorephobia in and of itself is rooted in anti-blackness. Whorephobia in and of itself is rooted in racism. Whorephobia is rooted in this idea, these ideas that we have about which bodies are dirty. And race is a giant factor that plays into ideas of how we think about dirty bodies. Forfeiture, yes. Yes, somebody commented, are you looking for the phrase criminal forfeiture, civil forfeiture? Yes, that is exactly what I was looking for. Criminal forfeiture allows police to rob us. They will literally take your money, they will literally take your possessions, they will take your drugs, they will take anything that they want, and they'll be like, ooh, we got it in arrest, it's evidence, we can't give it back. Yeah, alright. That is what it's called. Thank you so much to Cheerio8s. It is 8:54. These are all of the things that I wanted to talk about. As a reminder that I was doing this class to fundraise for the organization Philly Rua. We are running a relief fund for sex workers in Philadelphia. My dream, my fantasy, my goal is that we are able to keep this relief fund running long term. As of this point, we have given away over 50%. I'm pretty sure we're at like 53 or 54% of the money that we raised. I don't have a lot of data because we are a tiny team and we are stretched very thin, and so none of us have been able to run data. But because, I'm also one of the people who distributes money, we give money to houseless people. We literally put cash in people's hands. And it literally allows them housing. Yes, like the other day, I sent somebody some money and she was like, now I can afford my psychiatric appointment. So, the cash that we give people allows people housing, allows people food, allows people to take care of their dependents, allows people to take care of their medical needs. Please consider donating us. We have Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, GoFundMe. Yeah. I don't know how else to wrap this up. Josie, if you're in here, we should reach out for the data. I'm not sure what this is in reference to. We have, you know what? I wanna honor people's time. It's 8:56. Thank you so much. Somebody said, Rani, so grateful for you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much for coming and for staying with me for this last hour. Do people have questions? Do people have comments? Will you do it again? I am really hoping to like create a series of class. I think that it is really important to have conversations about how sex work and sex work decriminalization and sex work policing fits into this current climate of what we mean when we talk about defunding the police. Tomorrow, actually, there's going to be... The city is collecting testimonies on if we should have a hearing about the police budget. You guys, we have to testify why we need to have a hearing about the police budget. This system is so fucked up, but I got on that little, I have like 3 minutes of time, and I have to like figure out what I'm gonna say tomorrow, because what I would like to say is, fuck the police. I want a rookie cop salary and his benefits, because I do his job better than him. But I guess I can't say that professionally. Something along those lines. I want to know more about your Swarthmore series, but I can message you. We haven't started on that project. We are literally trying to like get money for it. There's like 5 million projects that I'm trying to get on, and literally I need money. Somebody give me money. If you have $100,000 laying around, Whole History Project is looking to get funded. If you have another $100,000, you know, like Philly, like the relief fund, we are always looking for money. Send us money. Sorry, that was a tangent. But you know, I think that in this particular climate, it is really important to talk about what, you know, like policing looks like in our communities. And I think that, you know, what is really worrying for me is this idea of community policing. And I think that people need to have nuanced conversations on why that is dangerous for many of us, right? Like, regular civilians police me in the same way that the city policeman does, right? Like a rookie cop is going to say a lot of the same things that a regular civilian cop is going to say. There isn't going to be a difference. Not for me. Not for a lot of my colleagues. Not for any of my colleagues, to be quite honest. The IRS, you know, when they like have a lot of opinions about how sex workers do taxes, that's not very different from like what the community thinks about how sex workers should or should not do their taxes, right? So in this climate in which we're talking about policing and which we're talking about community policing and transformative justice and all of these like fun things, I think that is really, really, really important to talk about the work, you know, like how sex workers fit into this. Yeah, that's what I have for today. It is 8:59. There are some people that I want to tell you guys to follow. A2abolition.com is a really cool project that everybody should know about. It is led by Black women who have done work about transformative justice for so very long. Tamika Spellman is a Black trans woman in DC who I believe is executive director, I believe is a current executive director of HIPS DC. So, you know, like, she's such an awesome pioneer, and you all should follow her work. She's fucking great. Another person that I think, you know, like, is an incredibly thoughtful person is the current executive director, who's a Black woman. I'm really bad with names, and I don't remember her name, but she's a Black woman who is currently heading the Drug Alliance policy. And, you know, like, she has, you know, she like had an interview the other day and she was talking about racism.